In the heart of West Africa lies a story the world has forgotten. A story of white fields under golden sunsets. A story of a nation that refused to kneel. This is Burkina Faso, the land of incorruptible people. And this is the story of their white gold revolution. For decades, cotton has been called Africa's white gold. But who truly owns this gold? Who profits from it? And what happens when a nation decides to take back what is rightfully theirs? Today, we journey through the fields of Burkina Faso to witness one of Africa's most extraordinary transformations, a revolution built not with weapons, but with seeds, soil, and the unbreakable spirit of a people who said enough. This is the story of how the poorest became the proudest, how cotton became freedom, and how one young captain dared to challenge the global order. Welcome to the White Gold Revolution. To understand this revolution, we must first understand the land itself. Burkina Faso, the name means land of incorruptible people, a declaration of identity, a badge of honor, landlocked in the arid Sol region, bordered by Mali, Niger, Benin, and Ghana. This nation of over 20 million people has always been defined by one thing: resilience. Over 80% of Burkina Faso's population depends on agriculture. And for generations, one crop has stood above all others: cotton. Walk through the southern plains during harvest season, and you'll witness something remarkable. Villages transform into seas of white. Endless fields of cotton bolls stretching toward the horizon. Men, women, and children working together, their hands stained with the earth, picking the soft white fiber that has sustained their families for generations. But here's what most people don't know. For every dollar made from Burkinabe cotton on the global market, less than 10 cents returns to the farmers who grew it. This is not just about economics. This is about dignity. This is about a system designed to keep Africa poor while the rest of the world grows rich. From its labor, the relationship between Burkina Faso and cotton goes back generations. In the dusty villages of Bobo Dioulasso, Hound, and Koudougou, cotton is more than a crop. It is life itself. It pays for school fees, buys medicine, feeds families. When the rains come and the first green shoots push through the red earth, hope returns to the countryside. But that hope has always been fragile, always dependent on forces beyond the farmer's control. For decades, these farmers worked not for themselves, but for distant corporations. They planted not what they wanted, but what they were told. They sold not at fair prices, but at whatever the global market dictated. Their cotton-enriched textile factories in Europe and Asia clothed millions around the world. Yet they themselves remained poor. This paradox, this painful contradiction, haunted every harvest. The very thing that should have brought prosperity instead brought dependency. Yet despite all this, the people never gave up. Through droughts and debt, through political chaos and falling prices, they continued to plant. They continued to believe. Because they understood something fundamental: the land was theirs, the labor was theirs, and one day the profits would be theirs too. This resilience, this stubborn refusal to surrender, set the stage for everything that would follow. Beneath the quiet rhythm of rural life, a consciousness was forming. a belief that Burkina Faso's white gold should belong to Burkinabe hands. To understand why Burkina Faso remained trapped in poverty despite its wealth, we must journey back in time to an era of exploitation and control. We must return to the days when the nation was not yet called Burkina Faso, but Upper Volta, a territory carved out by French colonial ambition. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, European powers divided Africa among themselves like a cake at a dinner party. The French took possession of vast territories across West Africa, and among them was the land that would become Burkina Faso. Their mission, wrapped in the language of civilization and progress, was in truth a campaign of extraction. They wanted resources, labor, and above all, control. The French understood cotton's value from the beginning. Across their colonies, they envisioned massive plantations producing the fiber that fed Europe's booming textile mills. But this vision required more than land. It required forcing people to work that land under conditions they did not choose. In the early 1900s, French colonial authorities began organizing rural communities into forced labor systems. Entire villages were ordered to plant cotton instead of food crops. Those who resisted faced punishment, exile, or worse. This was how Burkina Faso's cotton industry began, not from free enterprise or voluntary trade, but from colonial coercion. The French introduced new farming methods and established trading posts. But these were not acts of charity. They were mechanisms of control, designed to ensure a steady flow of raw materials to European ports. Cotton was harvested in Burkina Faso, shipped to France, processed in European mills, and then sold back to Africa as expensive finished textiles. The profit never returned to the people who had picked the cotton with their bare hands. For the farmers, cotton became a cruel paradox. It offered income, yes, but it also deepened their dependency on a system designed to exploit them. They were locked in a cycle where they owned neither the means of production nor the fruits of their labor. As one French colonial administrator infamously wrote, "Cotton civilizes the native." But in truth, cotton enslaved him, not in chains of iron, but in chains of debt, taxation, and forced compliance. Yet even under the weight of oppression, resistance flickered. The people of Upper Volta, proud and unyielding, found ways to defy the system. They secretly grew food crops alongside cotton, traded outside official channels, and preserved their traditions despite attempts at cultural erasure. This quiet defiance, passed from generation to generation, kept alive the dream of true freedom. By the 1940s and 50s, the winds of change began blowing across Africa. The Second World War had weakened European empires, and independence movements were rising across the continent. In Upper Volta, the idea of self-determination took root among farmers, laborers, students, and young intellectuals who had grown tired of foreign rule. They began asking dangerous questions. Why must our cotton feed Europe's industries while our villages starve? Why do we remain poor when our soil is so rich? These questions planted the seeds of a revolution that would take decades to bloom. In 1960, independence finally came. The French flag was lowered, and Upper Volta became a sovereign nation. The people celebrated in the streets, dancing and singing. believing that political freedom would bring economic liberation. But they soon discovered a harsh truth. While the faces of power changed, the structures of exploitation remained. The colonial trading systems, the export monopolies, the foreign banks all stayed in place, now operating under new names and new agreements. Cotton continued to flow out of the country, enriching multinational corporations that replaced the colonial administrators. Burkina Faso entered independence with a heavy burden, an economy designed not for its own prosperity, but to serve foreign interests. This neo-colonial legacy would haunt the nation for decades, shaping its politics, its poverty, and its people's growing frustration. But it also strengthened their resolve. The memory of what had been stolen would one day fuel the determination to reclaim it. By the 1970s and 80s, Burkina Faso stood at a crossroads. Political independence had not brought economic freedom. The cotton fields still belonged to the people in name only. Farmers toiled endlessly, yet prosperity remained a distant dream. But beneath the surface, something was stirring. A new consciousness was emerging, born from years of struggle and frustration. The 1970s were difficult years. Global oil crises, droughts, and food shortages ravaged much of Africa and Burkina Faso. Then still cold Upper Volta was hit especially hard. Rural communities suffered the most. The very farmers who grew the cotton that sustained the national economy often could not feed their own families. In village meetings and market gatherings, conversations began to shift. People were no longer talking only about survival. They were talking about change. It was during this period that farmer cooperatives began to emerge. These were grassroots organizations, small groups of farmers pooling their resources, sharing equipment, and selling their cotton collectively to negotiate better prices. What started as modest local initiatives quickly spread across the countryside. For the first time, farmers discovered the power of unity. By standing together, they could resist exploitation by middlemen and traders who had long taken advantage of their isolation. The government recognized the potential of these movements and established Sofitex, a national cotton company meant to organize production and manage exports. At first, Sofitex operated under heavy French influence, but gradually, Burkinabe managers began taking control. This shift, though small, represented something larger. It was the first sign that the country could manage its own affairs. That independence was not just a political concept, but an economic possibility. Then came 1983, the year that changed everything. A young military captain named Thomas Sankara seized power in a coup that sent shockwaves across Africa. Charismatic, fearless, and deeply committed to self-reliance, Sankara became one of the continent's most beloved and controversial leaders. He did not just want to reform the government. He wanted to transform the nation's soul. Sankara renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, the land of a proud people. The new name was a declaration, a statement that his people would no longer bow to foreign powers. His revolution rested on three pillars: dignity, independence, and self-sufficiency. He urged Burkinabe citizens to reject dependency on foreign aid, to grow their own food, to wear clothes made from their own cotton, and to take pride in who they were. Under Sankara's leadership, cotton took on a new symbolic meaning. It was no longer just an export commodity. It was a flag of national identity. Sankara famously wore traditional outfits made from local cotton and encouraged every citizen to do the same. "Let us consume what we produce," he declared. "Let us produce what we consume." This simple yet powerful message resonated deeply. For the first time, cotton was not something grown for distant markets. It was something grown for Burkina Faso itself. During Sankara's brief but electrifying rule from 1983 to 1987, the cotton sector began to flourish under renewed enthusiasm. Production increased. Local weaving industries were promoted, and farmer cooperatives were strengthened. The people felt seen and valued. They felt, perhaps for the first time, that their government was truly on their side. But Sankara's revolutionary policies threatened powerful interests both inside and outside Burkina Faso. His anti-imperialist stance, his rejection of foreign debt, and his calls for African unity challenged the global order. Western governments and international financial institutions viewed him as dangerous. And in October 1987, in a coup widely believed to have been supported by external powers, Thomas Sankara was assassinated. He was just 37 years old. His death marked the end of his socialist revolution, but not the end of his spirit. The ideas he planted, particularly in the cotton sector, continued to grow quietly beneath the surface. The belief that Burkina Faso's wealth belonged to its people had taken root too deeply to be erased, even as new leaders took power and foreign influence returned. The memory of Sankara lived on in the hearts of farmers, students, and soldiers. In the years following his death, Burkina Faso faced instability and setbacks, yet cotton production continued to rise. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the country had become the largest cotton producer in West Africa. But even this achievement was bittersweet. Output was high, but profits remained low. The structure of exploitation had not changed. Foreign corporations still bought raw cotton cheaply, processed it abroad, and sold it back at inflated prices. Still, something fundamental had shifted. The people were no longer blind to the injustice. They understood the system. They knew they were being cheated. And when awareness combines with frustration, revolution becomes inevitable. Somewhere in the villages and barracks, a new generation was watching, learning, and preparing. Among them was a young man who would one day carry the torch of Sankara's unfinished dream. His name was Ibrahim Traoré. By the dawn of the 21st century, Burkina Faso had achieved something remarkable. It had become one of Africa's leading cotton producers. Its fields yielding thousands of tons of fiber every year. Trucks loaded with cotton bales rumbled through the countryside, heading to ports for export. From the outside, it looked like progress, like a poor nation finally finding its footing in the global economy. But beneath this surface of achievement lay a bitter reality. The more cotton Burkina Faso produced, the poorer its farmers became. To understand this cruel paradox, we must examine the structure of the global cotton trade. A system designed not for fairness, but for domination. Cotton, like oil or diamonds, is controlled by powerful forces. multinational corporations, financial institutions, and wealthy governments that dictate prices from boardrooms thousands of miles away from the fields. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the United States government began pouring billions of dollars into subsidies for American cotton farmers. These subsidies allowed U.S. producers to sell cotton at artificially low prices on the world market, undercutting farmers in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. While American farmers received government checks that covered their costs and guaranteed their profits, Burkina farmers faced collapsing prices that barely covered the expense of seeds and labor. A farmer in Burkina Faso could work from dawn to dusk, harvest 1,000 kilograms of cotton, and earn less than $400, barely enough to feed his family for a few months. Meanwhile, American farmers producing the same amount received thousands in subsidies and market support. This was not free trade. This was economic warfare disguised as policy. The injustice was so obvious that even international organizations took notice. The World Trade Organization acknowledged that these subsidies violated fair trade principles. Burkina Faso, alongside Mali, Chad, and Benin, formed what became known as the Cotton Four, a coalition demanding an end to unfair subsidies and fair compensation. Their leaders traveled to Geneva, to Brussels, to Washington, presenting their case with data, with passion, with moral clarity. But their voices were drowned out by the machinery of global power. The wealthy nations kept their subsidies. The poor nations kept their poverty. As prices fell and frustration grew, multinational corporations arrived with a new promise: genetically modified cotton. In 2003, the American biotech giant Monsanto introduced Bt cotton to Burkina Faso, claiming it would revolutionize African farming. The modified seeds, they said, would resist pests, reduce the need for expensive pesticides, and dramatically increase yields. To desperate farmers and a struggling government, it sounded like salvation. Asterisk at first. The results seemed miraculous. Farmers reported higher yields and fewer pest problems. Government officials hailed the experiment as a success, and international media praised Burkina Faso as a model for African innovation. For a brief moment, hope returned to the cotton fields. But as the seasons passed, the promise began to unravel. The quality of the cotton fiber started to deteriorate. Buyers in Europe and Asia, who had once prized Burkina cotton for its softness and length, began complaining. The modified cotton was coarser, shorter, less valuable. Prices dropped. At the same time, the cost of participating in the system skyrocketed. Farmers discovered they were now dependent on Monsanto for every planting season. They could no longer save seeds from their harvest as their ancestors had done for generations. Instead, they had to purchase new proprietary seeds every year, along with specific fertilizers and chemicals. What had been marketed as liberation turned into a new form of bondage. By 2016, Burkina Faso made a historic and courageous decision. It banned GMO cotton entirely, becoming the first African nation to reject the biotech experiment. The decision sent a powerful message to the world. The people of Burkina Faso would no longer accept solutions imposed from outside. They would reclaim control of their agriculture, their seeds, and their future. But the damage had been done. Years of market manipulation, falling prices, and failed experiments had left the cotton sector fragile and the farming communities exhausted. Behind every economic statistic was a human face, a farmer wondering how to pay school fees, a mother struggling to feed her children, a young man questioning whether there was any future in agriculture at all. In villages across the cotton belt, infrastructure remained poor. Farmers transported their harvest on rough dirt roads, sometimes carrying bales on their heads for miles. Middlemen exploited their desperation, offering unfair prices knowing the farmers had no alternatives. Education and health care remained scarce. And as violence from extremist groups began spreading across the soil, many young people faced an impossible choice: stay and struggle on the land, or leave in search of opportunity elsewhere. Even as Burkina Faso's cotton earned millions on international markets, the profits never truly stayed in the country. Western corporations, shipping companies, and banks extracted the bulk of the wealth. The cotton was grown in Africa, but the real money was made in Europe and Asia, in factories and boardrooms far from the fields. This is what economists call the value chain trap, a system where poor nations produce raw materials but never control or profit from processing, manufacturing, or distribution. For every $100 made from Burkina cotton abroad, less than $10 returned to the farmers who had grown it. This was not simply economics. This was neocolonialism in a new form, a sophisticated system of domination that required no armies, only contracts and corporations. The chains were invisible, but just as strong. By the late 2010s, frustration had reached a boiling point. The farmers were tired of promises that never materialized. They were tired of working harder only to fall deeper into poverty. They were tired of watching their children inherit the same struggles they had endured. Something had to change, not just in policy, but in consciousness. The people needed leaders who understood their pain, who would fight not for foreign approval, but for national dignity. And in the villages and military barracks, a young officer was watching, listening, and preparing to act. His name was Ibrahim Traoré, and he believed that true independence began not with speeches, but with soil. Not with foreign aid, but with self-reliance. The stage was set for a new chapter in Burkina Faso's history. A chapter that would turn white gold from a symbol of exploitation into a weapon of liberation. Every revolution has its moment of awakening, a point when frustration transforms into action and hope replaces despair. For Burkina Faso, that moment arrived in the early 2020s, and it was embodied in the figure of a young soldier who would become the face of a new movement. His name was Ibrahim Traoré, and his rise to power marked the beginning of the white gold revolution. By the late 2010s, Burkina Faso was a nation on the edge. Decades of economic stagnation, foreign dependency, and broken promises had eroded public trust. The political establishment, led by President Blaise Compaoré for 27 years until his overthrow in 2014, had maintained power through alliances with Western governments and international financial institutions. On the surface, the country was portrayed as a stable democracy. But for ordinary citizens, Stability meant stagnation. The cotton sector remained controlled by foreign interests. Corruption infected government institutions, and the dream of true independence felt like a distant memory. When Compaore was finally overthrown in October 2014 after massive street protests, the people believed real change had finally come. But the euphoria was short-lived. Transitional governments came and went. Elections were held, but the same economic structures remained intact. The farmers still sold their cotton at unfair prices. The youth still saw no future. And a new crisis was emerging that would test the nation like never before: terrorism. From 2015 onward, Burkina Faso became one of the main battlegrounds in the expanding conflict across the Sahel. Armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS began spreading into the northern and eastern regions, attacking villages, schools, military outposts, and infrastructure. The government's response was chaotic and ineffective. Soldiers were under-equipped, underpaid, and sent into battle without adequate training or support. Civilians, especially in rural areas, were left defenseless. Entire communities were displaced, fields were abandoned, and the fragile rural economy began collapsing. To make matters worse, the government relied heavily on French military assistance. France maintained a strong military presence across West Africa through its Operation Barkhane, positioning itself as a partner in the fight against terrorism. But despite years of French involvement, the violence only intensified. Many Burkinabé began questioning France's true intentions. Was it there to help or to maintain control? Conversations about neo-colonial occupations spread from the villages to the cities, from the markets to the military barracks. It was in this climate of frustration and disillusionment that Ibrahim Traoré emerged. Born in 1998 in Bondokai, a modest town in western Burkina Faso, Traoré grew up witnessing the struggles of ordinary people. He saw his community battle poverty, drought, and a system that seemed designed to keep them powerless. He understood from an early age what it meant to serve one's land, not for personal gain, but for a higher purpose. Traoré joined the military driven by a sense of duty. He rose quickly through the ranks, earning respect for his humility, intelligence, and courage. He served in some of the most dangerous regions of the country, witnessing firsthand the suffering of his people and the failures of leadership. He saw soldiers die defending their homeland while politicians enriched themselves. He saw foreign advisors making decisions that should have been made by Burkinabe hands. He saw the cotton farmers of his childhood still trapped in poverty, still waiting for promises that never came. And he made a silent vow: if no one will fight for them, I will. In January 2022, the military staged a coup, removing President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore from power. The new leader, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, promised security and reform. But within months, it became clear that little had changed. Attacks by extremist groups continued. Corruption persisted. The economic system remained dependent on foreign powers. The frustration that had driven the first coup was now building toward a second. On September 30th, 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, just 34 years old, led a group of young officers in a second coup, removing Damiba and assuming leadership of the country. The news spread across Africa like wildfire. In the streets of Ouagadougou, crowds poured out waving flags, chanting Traoré's name, celebrating the arrival of a leader who seemed to represent their aspiration. Young, bold, and unapologetically nationalist, Traoré became an instant symbol of a new generation. A generation that refused to bow to neo-colonial powers. In his first address to the nation, Traoré spoke with a calm but unmistakable conviction. "We must reclaim what is ours," he declared. "Our land, our resources, our destiny. Burkina Faso will no longer kneel before anyone." Those words echoed across the continent. For many Africans, Traoré was not just a military leader. He was the rebirth of Thomas Sankara's spirit, a living reminder that true freedom demands courage. Traoré wasted no time in taking action. He expelled certain foreign military advisors and began diversifying Burkina Faso's international partnerships, reaching out to Russia, Turkey, and other nations. He called for greater regional cooperation among African countries to solve African problems. But most importantly, he turned his attention to the foundation of the nation's economy, agriculture, industry, and the white gold that had always been the people's lifeline. For Traoré, cotton was more than an economic commodity. It was a symbol of self-reliance, a test of whether Burkina Faso could truly control its own destiny. He understood that sovereignty was not just about military power or political declarations. It was about economic independence. It was about ensuring that the wealth created by Burkinabe hands stayed in Burkinabe pockets. Under his leadership, the government began implementing policies to strengthen local cooperatives, invest in national textile industries, and ensure that cotton processing happened inside the country rather than abroad. The goal was simple but revolutionary: stop exporting raw materials and start producing finished goods. Turn cotton into clothing, fabric into fashion, and fiber into profit that stays at home. Traoré often invoked the legacy of Sankara, reminding his people that he who feeds you controls you. He expanded the vision: he who controls his cotton controls his economy. The message was clear. Burkina Faso's revolution would not be fought only with guns. It would be fought with seeds, with soil, with the sweat of farmers and the skill of weavers. The cotton fields that had once symbolized submission would now become symbols of sovereignty. The turning point had arrived. The chains of dependency were beginning to crack. The people, long resigned to powerlessness, were rising with renewed hope. And the world, watching from a distance, was beginning to notice that something extraordinary was happening in this small, landlocked nation. The white gold revolution had begun. When Ibrahim Traoré spoke of sovereignty, he was not talking about abstract concepts or grand political theories. He was talking about the soil beneath the feet of his people, the cotton in their fields, and the dignity in their labor. The revolution he envisioned was practical, rooted in the everyday reality of farmers, weavers, and small entrepreneurs. It was a revolution that asked a simple but powerful question: why should Burkina Faso export its wealth only to buy it back at 10 times the price? The answer to that question became the foundation of a new national strategy. Under Traoré's leadership, the government launched a comprehensive plan to transform the cotton sector from a source of dependency into an engine of self-sufficiency. The slogan was straightforward and inspiring: produce, process, and profit at home. For decades, Burkinabe farmers had been trapped in a cycle of extraction. They grew the cotton, sold it cheaply to foreign buyers, and watched it leave the country as raw fiber. That cotton was then processed in factories in China, India, or Europe, turned into fabric and clothing, and sold back to Africa at a massive markup. Every stage of value addition happened outside Burkina Faso, and with each stage, the country lost potential jobs, income, and economic power. This had to change. The first step was empowering the farmers themselves. The government introduced programs to provide smallholder farmers with better access to credit, modern equipment, and training in sustainable farming practices. Agricultural cooperatives, which had existed for decades but often struggled with poor management and limited resources, were strengthened and modernized. Farmers were given collective bargaining power, allowing them to negotiate better prices and resist exploitation by middlemen. In cotton-producing regions like Bobo-Dioulasso, Hound, and Fordland-Ngoma, new centers for seed quality control, irrigation, and rural innovation were established. Extension workers traveled to remote villages, teaching farmers about soil health, water conservation, and organic pest management. The goal was not just to increase cotton yields, but to do so sustainably, in a way that protected the environment and ensured long-term productivity for the farmers. These changes meant more than just technical support. They meant recognition. For the first time in generations, they felt seen by their government. One farmer in Hound expressed it simply: "For years we worked for others. Now, when I look at my fields, I see my children's future in them." The second step was building local processing capacity. Burkina Faso had always exported raw cotton, but now the focus shifted to creating a complete value chain within the country. Small-scale spinning and weaving plants began appearing near traditional cotton zones. Some were privately owned, others operated through public-private partnerships, but all shared a common mission: to turn raw fiber into finished fabric without leaving the country. In Bobo-Dioulaso's industrial quarter, the hum of new looms joined the sounds of daily commerce. Workers, many of them young men and women from farming families, learned the skills of textile production. They spun thread, wove fabric, and dyed cloth in vibrant patterns. The locally produced Faso Danfeni, a traditional hand-woven fabric, made a powerful comeback. Once championed by Thomas Sankara as a symbol of national pride, it now became a uniform for teachers, civil servants, and students. Each bolt of fabric carried a label that read "Made in Burkina Faso," a phrase that had once been rare but was now becoming routine. This shift had profound implications. By processing cotton locally, Burkina Faso could capture far more value from each harvest. A kilogram of raw cotton might sell for $1 on the international market, but that same cotton, processed into fabric, could be worth $5 or more. Turned into finished clothing, its value could increase tenfold. Every stage kept within the country meant more jobs, more income, and more economic independence. The third step was investing in education and skills development. Agricultural colleges and rural training centers adapted their curricula, to focus on modern cotton science, sustainable practices, and business management. Students learned not just how to plant and harvest, but how to run cooperatives, manage supply chains, and market their products. The vision was clear. The next generation of farmers should also be entrepreneurs, capable of understanding the full economic cycle from seed to sale. Women, who had always played a crucial role in agriculture, but often remained invisible in economic statistics, became central to the transformation. Women's cooperatives received funding and training to develop small-scale textile projects. They learned spinning, weaving, and garment design. Many began running community enterprises, creating employment for other women and reinvesting profits into education and health care. This shift challenged traditional gender roles and demonstrated that economic empowerment and social progress could go hand in hand. The fourth step was embracing technology and innovation. Mobile platforms allowed farmers to check cotton prices in real time, cutting out exploitative middlemen who had long manipulated information to their advantage. Digital banking services enabled secure payments and helped farmers save and invest. Research institutions collaborated with local innovators to develop drought-resistant cotton varieties, organic fertilizers, and efficient irrigation systems. Even drones began appearing in the skies above cotton fields, monitoring crop health and helping farmers make precise decisions about watering and pest control. For a country once viewed as technologically backward, this blend of tradition and innovation signaled a bold new direction. The fifth and perhaps most important step was changing the national mindset. For too long, Burkina Faso had seen itself through the eyes of others as poor, dependent, struggling. Traoré and his government worked to shift that perception. They promoted a narrative of pride, capability, and self-reliance. Cotton was no longer just a commodity. It was a symbol of what Burkinabe people could achieve when they worked together and controlled their own resources. Public campaigns celebrated local products. Fashion shows in Ouagadougou featured clothing made entirely from domestic cotton and fabrics. Artists and musicians incorporated cotton imagery into their work, singing songs about the fields, the harvest, and the revolution. In schools, children learned the history of cotton, from colonial exploitation to modern independence, understanding that the present was built on past struggles and future possibilities depended on present actions. This cultural transformation was as important as the economic one. It reminded every citizen that sovereignty was not just a government policy. It was a daily practice, a choice to support local industry, to buy Burkinabe products, to take pride in national identity. As these changes took root, the results began to show. Cotton production remained strong, but more importantly, the profits were staying in the country. Villages that had known only hardship began to see new schools, health clinics, and markets. Young people who had once dreamed only of escaping to cities or migrating abroad now spoke of staying home, of building businesses, of being part of the transformation. The revolution was not without challenges. Infrastructure remained weak in many areas. Global market fluctuations still affected prices. Terrorism and insecurity in certain regions disrupted farming and trade. But despite these obstacles, a fundamental shift had occurred. The people of Burkina Faso were no longer passive participants in a system designed by others. They were active agents of their own destiny. The cotton fields, once reminders of exploitation, were being reclaimed as symbols of resistance and hope. Every seed planted, every bowl picked, every thread spun was an act of defiance against a global order that had long undervalued African labor and resources. The white gold revolution was proving that even a small, landlocked nation could stand tall and declare, "We will write our own story." Revolutions are not measured only in GDP growth or export statistics. The deepest transformations occur in the soul of a nation, in how people see themselves and their place in the world. In Burkina Faso, the white gold revolution sparked a cultural awakening that went far beyond economics. Cotton, once a symbol of colonial exploitation, became a canvas for national identity, a thread weaving together past and present. Tradition and innovation. At the heart of this cultural renaissance was Fosso Danfani, the traditional hand-woven fabric that had been championed by Thomas Sankara decades earlier. Made entirely from local cotton and dyed with natural pigments. Each piece of Fosso Danfani tells a story through its patterns. Some designs are geometric, sharp and bold. Others flow with organic curves, echoing the landscape. But every bolt carries the same unspoken message. We are capable, we are proud, we are Burkinabe. Under Traoré's leadership, Fosso Danfani experienced a powerful revival. Government officials began wearing it to official functions. Teachers wore it in classrooms. Students wore it at graduations. What had once been seen as old-fashioned suddenly became a badge of honor, a way of declaring allegiance not to foreign fashion, but to national heritage. When a young graduate walks across the stage wearing Fosso Danfani, it is more than a sartorial choice. It is a statement that local skill and creativity are equal to anything produced elsewhere. This cultural shift extended beyond clothing. Artists embraced cotton as a central theme in their work. Painters used the whiteness of cotton bowls to represent purity and rebirth. Sculptors created installations from cotton plants and fabric, exhibited in galleries from Ouagadougou to Dakar to Paris. Poets wrote verses describing cotton seeds as sleeping nations that awaken with the first rain. Metaphors for Burkina Faso itself, dormant for so long, but now stirring with new life. Musicians incorporated cotton imagery into their lyrics and performances. Traditional drums beat rhythms that mimicked the motion of picking cotton, while modern electric guitars added contemporary energy. Songs praised the farmers, celebrated the harvest, and declared that the nation's future would be woven by its own hands. These songs played on radio stations, in markets, at festivals, spreading the message of the revolution to every corner of the country. Fashion designers saw an opportunity not just for business, but for political expression. Runway shows in Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso began featuring collections made entirely from domestic materials. Models walked in flowing robes, tailored suits, and avant-garde pieces, all sourced and produced within Burkina Faso. These shows traveled internationally to Paris, Accra, Lagos, and Dakar, presenting African identity on its own terms. Controlled by African hands, international fashion magazines began taking notice. What Burkinabe designers were doing was more than creating clothes. They were making statements about sovereignty, sustainability, and the power of local production. Each garment label reading "Made by Burkinabe" hands became a quiet act of resistance against a global industry that had long exploited African labor while denying African creativity. Schools and cultural centers launched programs teaching the complete journey of cotton, from seed to finished product. Students visited farms, watched ginning processes, learned weaving techniques, and studied the economics of textile production. Exhibits displayed colonial-era cotton gins beside modern solar-powered machines, creating visual timelines that connected past exploitation to present empowerment. These educational initiatives ensured that young people understood their history, not as a burden, but as a source of strength and motivation. The cultural impact reached into spiritual life as well. In many villages, cotton retained a sacred quality. Elders spoke of it as a gift that united sky, rain, and soil. During harvest festivals, the first cotton bowls were blessed before processing began. Ceremonies that expressed gratitude to the land and hope for the future. This fusion of spiritual practice and economic activity gave the revolution an emotional depth that statistics could never capture. Work itself became a form of prayer, and dignity grew from honoring the earth. What made this cultural movement so powerful was its authenticity. It was not manufactured by government propaganda or imported consultants. It emerged organically from the people themselves, from their pride in finally controlling what they produced, from their belief that they were part of something historic. Grandmothers taught their granddaughters to weave. Young men learned to manage cooperatives. Engineers designed equipment powered by the sun. The revolution created a living bridge between generations, where progress did not erase memory but built upon it. In the end, white gold came to represent far more than economic survival. It stood for the belief that a nation's worth is measured not by the size of its exports, but by the strength of its self-respect. Every spindle turning in a rural workshop, every student studying textile science, every trader shipping finished cloth abroad contributed to a single, powerful narrative, a people reclaiming their story through the work of their own hands. What began as one nation's struggle to control its cotton soon became a beacon for an entire region. Burkina Faso's white gold revolution did not happen in isolation. Its impact rippled outward, inspiring neighboring countries and reshaping conversations about African economic independence. The message was simple but profound. Africa can feed itself, clothe itself, and prosper on its own terms. Across the Sol, other cotton-producing nations watched Burkina Faso's transformation with keen interest. Mali, Niger, Chad, and Benin faced similar challenges: dependence on raw material exports, exploitation by multinational corporations, and farmers trapped in poverty despite producing valuable crops. What Traoré's government demonstrated was that another path was possible. By building local processing capacity, strengthening cooperatives, and asserting national control over resources, a poor country could begin breaking free from the chains of neocolonialism. Farmer delegations from neighboring countries began visiting Burkina Faso to study its cooperative model. They toured processing plants, attended training sessions, and returned home with new ideas and renewed determination. Regional conferences brought together agricultural ministers, cooperative leaders, and economists to discuss how West African nations could work together to resist market manipulation and establish fairer pricing mechanisms. These conversations led to practical cooperation. Plans emerged for shared transport corridors linking landlocked producers to coastal ports in Togo, Benin, and Ghana. Joint research programs focused on developing drought-resistant cotton varieties, suited to the Sahel's harsh climate. The vision was ambitious but achievable. A regional cotton industry that competed not by undercutting each other, but by presenting a united front to global buyers. Within the broader framework of the African Continental Free Trade Area, Burkina Faso's approach offered a template for value-added production. Instead of competing to export raw materials at the lowest prices, African nations could process goods locally and trade finished products across borders. A shirt made from Burkinabe cotton, cut in Ghana, and sewn in Nigeria could circulate freely across Africa, with each country capturing part of the value chain. This regional integration promised not just economic growth, but genuine independence from external markets. The concept economists call value retention became central to these discussions. Rather than exporting unprocessed fiber for minimal profit, countries could capture multiple stages of production at home: spinning, weaving, dyeing, tailoring. This approach multiplied local earnings several times over and created thousands of jobs along the way. What Burkina Faso proved was that this model worked even for small, resource-constrained nations. If they could do it, others could follow. International markets began responding to Burkina Faso's transformation in unexpected ways. European and Asian buyers, facing growing consumer demand for ethical and sustainable products, started seeking out West African cotton produced under fair trade conditions. Burkina Faso's emphasis on transparent supply chains, fair wages, and climate-smart farming gave it a competitive advantage in premium markets, willing to pay higher prices for responsibly sourced materials. Long-term contracts were signed guaranteeing farmers stable prices and respecting labor standards. These agreements represented a subtle but significant shift in global commerce. For decades, African producers had been price takers, accepting whatever buyers offered. Now, they were beginning to negotiate as partners, setting terms that protected their interests. This evolution from supplication to negotiation marked a profound change in the balance of power. Development agencies and private investors shifted their approach as well. Instead of viewing Burkina Faso merely as an aid recipient, they began treating it as an investment opportunity. Funding flowed into vocational training programs, renewable energy projects for textile factories, and agricultural research. Students trained at Ouagadougou's textile institutes found employment throughout West Africa, spreading expertise across borders and building regional capacity. The environmental dimension of the revolution attracted global attention. Burkinabe scientists contributed research on sustainable agriculture to international forums, sharing data on water-efficient irrigation and soil restoration techniques. Their work demonstrated that smallholder farms, if properly supported, could match industrial plantations in productivity while maintaining ecological responsibility. This evidence strengthened Africa's voice in global climate negotiations, proving that development and sustainability could coexist beyond economics and environment. The white gold revolution began exporting something equally valuable: culture and inspiration. Fashion weeks in Accra, Lagos, and Nairobi showcased Burkinabe fabrics and designs. Musicians referenced cotton fields in their lyrics. Documentary filmmakers captured the story of transformation, streaming it to audiences worldwide. Through these cultural channels, Burkina Faso's narrative became part of Africa's collective self-portrait, a continent asserting control over its resources, its image, and its future. Observers from other regions of the global South identified parallels with their own struggles. Delegations from India, Vietnam, Brazil, and Bolivia visited to study the cooperative model and local processing strategies. These exchanges created unexpected solidarities, networks of developing nations sharing knowledge and supporting each other's efforts. To escape raw material dependency, the dialogue transcended geography. United by shared histories of exploitation and shared dreams of autonomy. Perhaps most significantly, the revolution began addressing one of Africa's most painful challenges: youth migration. By creating opportunities in rural areas, the cotton-based industries offered young people alternatives to dangerous journeys toward Europe or overcrowded urban slums. Skilled positions as technicians, designers, cooperative managers, and machine operators provided not just income but dignity and purpose. Migration no longer felt like the only escape. Staying home became a choice with meaning. When Burkina Faso's representatives spoke at international economic forums, their tone had changed. They no longer presented their country as vulnerable or dependent. They spoke as participants shaping markets, as innovators solving problems, as partners offering solutions. This shift from plea to partnership, from supplication to self-assurance, may prove to be the revolution's most lasting contribution. It changed how the world listened to Africa, and more importantly, how Africa listened to itself. The story of Burkina Faso's white gold revolution is far from finished. It remains a work in progress, a living experiment in economic sovereignty and national transformation. As the fields continue their eternal cycle of planting and harvest, the revolution evolves, adapting to new challenges and seizing new opportunities. The long-term vision is comprehensive and ambitious. Cotton now sits at the center of a strategic plan linking agriculture, energy, education, technology, and regional trade. Government planners envision industrial clusters where farmers, processors, and designers operate in integrated networks, supported by solar power and digital infrastructure. These clusters could transform Burkina Faso's landlocked geography from liability to asset, positioning the country as a crossroads of regional commerce rather than an isolated endpoint. Education remains a cornerstone of sustainable transformation. Classrooms from Ouagadougou to remote villages now teach agribusiness, renewable energy, and supply chain management alongside traditional subjects. Universities partner with cooperatives, offering internships that blend theory with practical experience. The goal is ambitious: to cultivate a generation fluent in both tradition and technology. Farmers who understand data analysis, engineers who respect ancestral knowledge, managers who measure success not just in profit, but in community well-being. Technology continues advancing at remarkable speed. Smartphones and satellite connectivity are becoming as common as plows in farming communities. Apps track rainfall patterns, manage cooperative finances, and connect farmers directly with regional and international buyers, eliminating exploitative middlemen. Future plans include artificial intelligence systems for yield forecasting and blockchain technology for supply chain transparency, allowing consumers worldwide to trace a garment back to the specific village and farmer who grew the cotton. Energy independence supports this technological leap. Unreliable electricity has long constrained industrial development, but innovative solutions are emerging. Engineers deploy microgrids powered by solar panels and biomass generators that burn cotton waste, stems, husks, and seeds. The same crop that clothes the nation may soon power its homes and factories. This circular approach reduces emissions, cuts costs, and reinforces a guiding philosophy: every resource, if respected, can serve multiple purposes. Infrastructure development accelerates transformation. Roads built initially for cotton transport now serve broader economic purposes, bringing markets for other crops and attracting secondary industries like packaging, printing, and logistics. Towns once viewed as depopulating rural outposts are becoming centers of enterprise. Young people who once spoke only of migration now discuss business plans and community development, proud to call themselves builders of a new countryside. Women's empowerment continues deepening. What began as small weaving cooperatives has evolved into substantial enterprises, managing entire value chains from ginning to garment export. Women now control significant economic resources, make strategic business decisions, and employ dozens of community members. Their rise is altering social structures as fundamentally as economic ones. By giving women financial control, the revolution ensures benefits flow directly into families, into nutrition, education, and health care, transforming empowerment from slogan into daily reality. Climate adaptation remains urgent. Burkina Faso stands on the front lines of climate change, facing increasing temperatures, unpredictable rainfall, and longer droughts. Yet farmers are demonstrating that adaptation can create opportunity. Through mixed cropping, water harvesting, and organic soil enrichment, yields stabilize even as conditions worsen. Research teams analyze each season's data, transforming local experience into regional knowledge. The result is not mere survival, but leadership in climate-smart agriculture that other nations study and emulate. Regional cooperation expands beyond bilateral exchanges. Plans for a West African cotton exchange could allow producers to set reference prices, hedge against market volatility, and coordinate logistics across borders. Such institutions would fundamentally alter the balance of power, shifting from accepting global prices to helping determine them. The broader dream envisions a continental manufacturing base where raw materials, semi-finished goods, and final products move freely across Africa, each stage adding value and pride. Yet challenges persist and new ones emerge. Security threats in certain provinces continue disrupting planting and transport. Global economic forces still create price volatility that can erase a season's profits overnight. Access to financing remains limited for many small producers. Infrastructure gaps in roads, electricity, and storage constrain full industrialization. Corruption, though reduced, has not been eliminated. The revolution faces resistance from vested interests, both internal and external, who benefit from the old system of exploitation. But every harvest season brings renewed determination. Despite hardships, the cotton returns. Fields that were abandoned to violence are gradually reclaimed. Farmers who lost everything rebuild. Cooperatives that struggled become profitable. This persistence itself constitutes resistance, proof that the revolution's foundation rests not in government policies or foreign investment, but in the unbreakable will of ordinary people. The transformation taking place in Burkina Faso offers lessons that transcend cotton or even agriculture. It demonstrates that sovereignty is not declared once, but cultivated continuously through countless daily decisions. It shows that dignity resides in work well done and fairly compensated. It proves that freedom to endure must be practiced in ordinary acts of planting, weaving, and trading honestly. In schools, churches, and community meetings, people now repeat a simple maxim born from hard experience: he who tends his field shapes his future. This wisdom captures the revolution's essence. Change does not arrive through foreign aid or international conferences. It grows from the soil, nurtured by patience, watered by sweat, harvested by hands that refuse to surrender. As another planting season approaches and farmers across Burkina Faso prepare their fields, they do so with something previous generations lacked: hope grounded in reality. They have seen transformation happen, felt its benefits, and understand their role in sustaining it. The fields that once symbolized exploitation now represent possibility. The cotton that once enriched only foreigners now builds local prosperity. The revolution that seemed impossible has become inevitable. Asterisk as our journey through Burkina Faso's white gold revolution comes full circle. We return to where we began, the fields. But now we see them differently. These are no longer just agricultural plots or economic units. They are battlegrounds where a quiet war for dignity was fought and is still being won. They are classrooms where generations learn that sovereignty demands courage. They are workshops where the fabric of freedom is woven thread by thread. The story of Burkina Faso's cotton is ultimately the story of human resilience. It is the story of farmers who refused to accept poverty as destiny, of women who transformed weaving into economic power, of young soldiers who believed their nation deserved better, and of a people who discovered that their greatest resource was not what grew in the ground, but what lived in their hearts: the refusal to be defeated. What Captain Ibrahim Traoré and his government initiated was not just policy reform. It was a restoration of dignity, a reclamation of identity, a revolution in the truest sense. By taking control of their cotton sector, Burkinabe people took control of their narrative. They transformed from victims of a global system into architects of their own future. The lessons from Burkina Faso echo far beyond its borders. They speak to every nation that has been told it is too poor, too small, too weak to control its destiny. They challenge the assumption that globalization means permanent dependency for the developing world. They prove that sovereignty begins not with military might or political declarations, but with economic independence, the ability to feed, clothe, and sustain oneself on one's own terms. Today, when a student in Ouagadougou wears clothing made from local cotton, it represents more than fashion. It is a statement of self-sufficiency. When a farmer in Hound sells cotton to a local processing plant instead of a foreign corporation, it represents more than a transaction. It is an act of liberation. When a woman in Bobo-Dioulasso runs a textile cooperative employing dozens of neighbors, it represents more than entrepreneurship. It is the fulfillment of a promise generations in the making. The white gold revolution teaches us that real change is slow, difficult, and fragile. It requires patience, sacrifice, and the willingness to persist through setbacks. It demands leaders who serve rather than exploit, systems that empower rather than extract, and citizens who believe in collective destiny more than individual escape. Most importantly, it requires understanding that freedom is not a destination but a journey. Not a gift, but a responsibility. As the sun sets over the cotton fields of Burkina Faso, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, farmers return to their homes with the day's work complete. Children play in village squares. Women gather around fires preparing evening meals. Men discuss the next season's planting. Life continues its ancient rhythm, but something fundamental has shifted. These people no longer work only for survival. They work with purpose, with pride, with the knowledge that their labor builds something larger than themselves. The cotton they grow no longer belongs to distant corporations or foreign markets. It belongs to them, and through it, they are weaving not just fabric, but a new future. One where African wealth serves African people, where dignity is not negotiable, and where sovereignty is practiced every single day. This is the true meaning of the white gold revolution. It is not measured in tons of cotton produced or dollars earned, though these matter. It is measured in the eyes of a farmer who sees hope in his fields, in the hands of a weaver who takes pride in her craft, in the voice of a leader who speaks truth to power, and in the heart of a nation that decided its story would be written by its own people. As we leave the fields and villages of Burkina Faso, we carry this story with us, not as history completed, but as revolution ongoing. For every bowl of cotton that opens under the African sun is a reminder that transformation is possible, that dignity is worth fighting for, and that even the smallest nation can stand tall when its people stand together. The revolution continues. The fields remember. The people endure. And the white gold of Burkina Faso shines not with the luster of wealth extracted, but with the brilliance of freedom earned. This is not the end of the story. This is just the beginning. The revolution is not in the cotton. The revolution is in the hands that grow it, the minds that process it, and the hearts that refuse to let it be stolen again. Burkina Faso has shown the world that true independence begins with a single seed, planted in one's own soil, by one's own hands, for one's own future. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the white gold revolution. If this story inspired you, share it, because stories of African resilience Creativity and sovereignty deserve to be told, celebrated. And remember, until next time, remember, freedom is woven one thread at a time.